Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from, either now or on the replay later. I'm Annette Richmond. This is a Smarter Career and Business Moves LinkedIn Live show. And I'm so excited to have my friend Paula with me. Now, we met a few years ago. You were one of the first guests when I started my show. And we got to meet each other in person last year at a conference. And so I am so excited to have you here. So for anyone who doesn't know you, can you just share a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm a certified professional resume writer and interview coach. I work with clients all across the US, all different industries. With those things, I write LinkedIn profiles, I write resumes. I also do LinkedIn critiques and resume critiques, and I do a fair amount of interview coaching. So I kind of draw on my years of experience. I worked for over a decade as a recruiter. And so I'm just happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I do remember when we met, I believe it was during the NRWA, during COVID, they were really good about having these Zoom sessions. And I feel so thankful for that. I mean, one of the silver linings of COVID was that they were having those sessions and I was able to meet so many colleagues who then I developed a relationship with on LinkedIn. Then I got to meet face-to-face at the conference. So I'm the same as you. I just feel like that's been so critical.
Yeah, I think of that as a silver lining too. I was doing a lot of meeting people on Clubhouse, and then I get to know them better on LinkedIn. And now I am also grateful that I've met and become friends with people kind of all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I love having you here to talk about interview skills and what's going on with virtual interviewing, because I always learn something. So let's jump right into it. And I will say the idea of virtual interviews is not really new. I was a recruiter too about a decade ago, and already employers were, they were interviewing candidates virtually by phone, some by video, even if they were local. And it was, and during the pandemic, obviously everything was virtual. And it feels like it's here today. And I just want to share some stats that you shared with me from SHRM, that 82% of employers adopted virtual interviews during the pandemic. Of course, no surprise there.
Right.
93% plan to continue using video. And then something I want to ask you about a little later, is 80% expect AI to have a moderate to significant impact on HR and recruiting. So can you start us off by just talking about sort of the impact of just virtual interviews, which I guess now are primarily video, on the industry? I mean, it's more convenient for employers, obviously, I would think, for candidates, but I don't know, maybe not as beneficial. So talk a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, I think what's important for candidates to know is the reason why companies are doing this. And companies are seeing such tremendous savings from doing this. So it's not going away. So you need to learn how to adapt to this environment. It's only going to get bigger. Basically, HireVue is a big system that a lot of companies use. And Unilever saved $1 million after they implemented this system. Hilton Hotels implemented this system and they shrunk their time to hire from 6 weeks to 5 days. So what's important for you to know as a candidate, it's not going away. You have to learn how to work within it. It's only going to become more prevalent because those big companies are kind of leading the charge. Right now, companies are using it a little bit more, well, two areas mainly, for entry level kind of starting point positions, and also for tech positions. But that's expanding. I mean, we're seeing it now in senior leadership positions. We're seeing it all over the board. So something to be prepared for. I did a talk with Bob McIntosh last week, and there are 50 people on the call. And he surveyed his group, how many of you have conducted a one-way video interview? And it was something like 25%. And
Wow.
So there's two different types of video interviews, mainly. There's more, but the two main ones are a one-way interview and a two-way interview. So one-way is also called a pre-recorded interview or a asynchronous interview. basically during those, the questions are pre-recorded. You can do it on your own time. You record your questions into a blank screen. And then a two-way video interview is more like what we're doing in that, where it's a Zoom session. It could be conducted on Zoom or through one of these portals.
Mhm.
And it's somebody is on the other end of the screen who's asking you the questions. It's still awkward because you're not face to face, but it's not quite as awkward as the blank screen. So candidates kind of need to know, like, okay, how am I going to work in these worlds? And it's really difficult for people like you and I see people all the time who haven't updated their resume in 20 years. There's also people who have not ever done a video interview or a virtual interview. And it's much different than a Zoom call. You know, we all gotten some bad habits on Zoom, like your sidebar's over here, so you're looking here. You're
Mhm.
cleaning out your desk while you're listening to the call. So there are some kind of different rules that apply, and you have to be cognizant of your operating. It's an interview. It is different.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I have a few questions
Mhm.
for you based on what you've just shared, but I know that whole, professional on the top and pajamas on the bottom, and
Right,
people think, "Oh, well, I'm on video," but you never know when you might have to get up and get
right,
something or
right,
something. And
right.
so, you really have to think of it. And um, the thing about video interviews, and I think people, at least 5 years ago, a lot of them were more just screening interviews, but today you'll have a series of them. And one thing I want to just highlight that you mentioned is, if video interviewing is shortening the hiring time, that should be very, very good news for candidates. The fact that they will get. Go ahead.
Right. Absolutely. And another thing to think about is it was Google when they had their campus recruiting. So after they implemented the system, instead of sending their recruiters out to all campuses across the US for some of their positions, they implemented this system. And they saved so much money, but more importantly, they were able to interview 300% more candidates. So what that means for you as a candidate is, before you might not have got interviewed by Google
Hmm.
or another company. And now your chances of being interviewed are greater because they are able to get through more candidates. So that can be great for you. It also means, on the flip side, you have more competition.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have to,
Yeah.
yeah. But another thing you touched on it and I forgot to address is, like, I like to point out the positives for candidates. So these interviewing by video can be advantageous for people.
Hmm.
So if, let's say, you're nervous, or like I had a client who was interviewing in downtown Chicago and he lived about an hour away, years ago. He had to
Yeah.
drive there, he had to fight the traffic. He didn't know where to park. He ended up just making his interview just on time.
Hmm.
And he was completely harried when he got there. And there's none of that anymore.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
you know, right.
No, I was just gonna say, I remember working in corporate myself, and at least a couple of days before, you'd have to go and drive to wherever the building was and make sure you could, so you knew to avoid
Mhm.
those. And then if there was an accident on the highway, well, too bad for you.
Yeah.
So one thing that I do want you to give us some advice on is preparing for these video interviews. And also, my question is, if I'm a candidate and I'm applying and I'm invited for an interview, will I know in advance if I'm actually meeting somebody, or I'm going to be just talking to a screen?
That's a great question. Usually companies divulge that information in advance. They don't have to, except for a few states.
Okay.
And I apologize, I don't know exactly which states
That's
those
okay.
are, but it's kind of coming across the country, excuse me. And I believe that HR teams are recognizing that it just makes more sense to get ahead of this and
Mhm.
warn people, and people don't like surprises. So they're really actually doing a pretty good job preparing the candidates. They'll say, go to this site, there's some sample questions, check out this YouTube video that explains how this process is going to work. I do think that or HR departments seem to be doing a pretty good job at preparing candidates of this,
Mhm.
but I can't guarantee it. And I was reviewing a video of a recruiter who took himself through the process of a different company to show people what these interviews look like. And in the middle of it, So it's all these video questions that pop up. It's a pre-recorded recruiter who comes in and says, give me an example of a time, blah, blah, blah. But then in the middle of it, they say, tell me what your qualifications are for this position that make you stand out. And it's a written question. So in the middle of it, they just have to type out. I'm an interview coach, and I would be freaked out by that. Yeah. So yeah, it's crazy, you know, what candidates, kind of the hoops they're having to go through a little bit.
So if you can share a few tips, techniques that candidates can use to prepare for these virtual interviews, and also you know, maybe how to get comfortable being on video, because as you know, a lot of people get really nervous when they're on video, and self-conscious about, I think, being on video. So I know that's a big question, but
yeah, I'll start with the tips and tricks. So eye contact, so your camera level should be a little bit above plane. So you want it a couple inches above. So you're looking up. You don't want to be looking down. You don't want to be looking up. So you kind of have to find that right camera angle. And then, like, for example, for you and I, once we signed on, I minimized my screen so that you are right below my camera. And then you have to kind of train yourself to not watch yourself and to watch the other person. And it does take practice. And that kind of gets at your second question, which was okay, but I have more tips. Okay, then the other thing is to smile. You know, it just creates that connection. It helps you feel less nervous, even if you're faking it till you make it in the beginning. Helps your body release that cortisol and those endorphins. It also helps the recruiter feel less nervous too. Lighting's huge. If you can go in front of a window, natural light's great. Bring in, so you don't have to buy one of those ring lights. You can, if you know you're going to be, you know, completing, you know, hitting your job search hard, buy a ring light. It's like $20 on Amazon. Yeah. But also you can bring other lights for your, you know, take your desk, move it somewhere else. Like, you got to think a little bit creatively and try out some different locations. Hand gestures, I've been using a ton of them. Me too. I always tell my clients when I work with them on interview coaching, don't lose that. It's rare that I see too many hand gestures. And if you think about your examples, if you can ever emphasize it with a hand gesture, that it really does help. So if you say, like, I've got 3 examples, or we started with the problem being huge, or we started with something here and got it to here. And it just kind of helps bridge that gap of this awkward video that we're on instead of a real life thing. Body posture, don't fold your arms, lean in a little bit. I'm actually not right now. You should sit on the front part of your chair and have your body at a little bit of an angle, so you're leaning in. It just kind of, it helps your diaphragm open up and your voice project a little bit. And your shoulders, try to think about, you want your shoulders to be proud and stand tall, but not slouching and not tense. So they're down a little bit. Attire, we talked about that a little bit. Dress professionally. I usually recommend people dress one level above what they're going for. I don't know about you, Annette, but when I worked in recruiting, people asked me the attire all the time, and we were happy to give that information.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, think about your internet connection. So if your connectivity is really not great, go to somewhere else. I had a client who, he's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to my parents' house. They have great Wi-Fi, and my kid won't be there and my dog won't be there. So, you know, think about those distractions. Right. And not that recruiters aren't, we all live in this world. I've heard your dog, you know, the last time we met, and I worked with lots of clients. It's something that we all work within, but if you can control what you can control. Yeah. Yeah. Your background is part of your brand. So think about that. Mine's not ideal. I'm not at home today, but, you know, think about those things. That some people prefer a neutral background. I don't mind if there's things back there, as long as it's pretty clean and crisp. And I had a client who, he was going for some kind of a job in the sports industry. It was like an offshoot. I can't remember. It was something with sports analytics. And he had some kind of sports thing back there, and he did it on purpose. Like, I want them to ask me about my alma mater and
Yeah.
so you can think about those things.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No,
I
I
was
was gonna say, and what's your take on sort of virtual backgrounds? Now, when I first started doing things on video, doing my live show, I always used a virtual background, and then if you don't have a green screen, it can look kind of wonky. You get that, that pixelation. And I had a speaker, someone professional speaker friend of mine say, you really should not use the virtual backgrounds because people like to see, as you were talking about, a little bit of personality about kind of
Mhm,
who you are in the background.
mhm.
So what's your take on that?
I think test it out and just see. It kind of depends what's back there.
Okay.
I've seen those blurred one that look
Yeah.
pretty good. It's just a kind of like a light blur.
Uh-huh.
I've been using a virtual background, sometimes when I'm not at my house with my Zoom clients. But yeah, I think I prefer not having a virtual background. And I think most recruiters, like you said, prefer that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So my take on this then is that you should prepare as if you are going in to meet someone, because you probably won't, from my understanding, talking to recruiters, is you're unlikely to meet anybody face to face until you're like one of the top maybe five candidates or something, or the top maybe two or three candidates where
Mhm.
you're each, you're all invited to come in and meet in person.
Yeah, prepared the same way. And some of the same concepts really apply. I think the overarching concept is you're trying to create a connection and create engagement. So your resume is kind of those facts and figures
Hmm.
that gets you in the door. The interview could get you the job. And it's more about, can you work? I mean, yes, they want you to have the skills, but they also want to know, do I want to work with this person? So
Hmm.
taking those opportunities to create that connection is still really important and extremely difficult in a virtual or video interview. So like some of those same concepts, like radiate positivity right away. You want to kind of bridge that gap. Those first few seconds or minutes are really important. Those, like, kind of those impressions matter. You want to really be nice to everybody you meet. That's part of it. You might have a
Yep.
panel of people. Be mindful of those bad remote habits. So like we talked about it briefly, but if just really, in
Right.
order to really engage, you have to listen.
Not to be doing like
Yeah.
fidgeting.
Yeah. Yeah, and listen and connect with the person. And then also, like, technology delays can be kind of tricky.
Mhm.
And even though you can proactively plan for everything, you or excuse me, for some things, you can't proactively plan for everything. So anticipate there might be some problems and you might have to go with the flow. I mean, recruiters are telling me like that's part of the deal now. They like to see, they don't do it on purpose, but if it does happen, they want to see how the candidate's going to, handle that.
Oh, absolutely. And,
Mhm.
obviously most people are making big hand gestures in their hair like I did, but some people will. They fidget with their hair, they have
Mhm.
jewelry, they fidget with that. And that can be kind of disconcerting when you're on the other
Mhm.
end. So
Mhm.
now I'd like to just sort of pivot over to talking about AI interviewing, because I don't know much about it. And so I'm interested to learn kind of what it is and how it's going to affect the industry, and maybe what candidates should be getting ready for.
So AI is already being used all along the process for many, many companies. So not just in AI interviews, but it could be in the chatbot that you talk with when you're just looking at the job description online. It could be in the way they schedule you. It could be in just some questions that you ask about benefits. So AI is already there. It's along the whole process. It could be in onboarding. But specifically within video interviewing, it's really interesting. So
Okay.
basically, what they do is, so for example, like when Hilton did this, they had a team from HireVue come in. They interview for one particular position. They interviewed employees all across that position. Great performers, poor performers, medium performers, everybody, and they had them complete interview questions. Then they analyzed how they did on those questions versus their performance reviews. And then they developed the algorithms to sort
Okay.
out for those qualities and those skills. So it's
Oh, wow.
really, really complicated. So
Wow.
then what they did is then when a new person applies and interviews, they're evaluated against those parameters, and then they're sorted into those buckets. So it's kind of like a high, medium, and low tier bucket based on like how well, it's like predictability of how well they're going to do in this position. So super interesting, super complicated. The algorithms are deep. A lot of companies, most companies don't reveal what they are
Hmm.
exactly. So, but some of the things that people are kind of like evaluated are gestures, facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, inflection, and many, many, many others. So you're evaluated and then you're put in high, medium, and low tier. And
Hmm.
then recruiters can see everybody. So it's similar to applicant tracking systems where
Okay.
all the resumes are in there. It's just that they're being scored. And
Hmm.
then sometimes recruiters don't have the time to go through all of those, and they may only go to the candidates who score the highest. So that's very similar to video interviews where they're then scored, and then the top tier is most likely to be brought in for that next stage.
Wow. So on the one hand, as I'm listening to you talking about this, it's kind of freaking me out a little bit. It's kind of like, but then on the other hand, it feels like that might mitigate, if not eliminate, the unconscious bias that people have. And the horns and halo, I meet somebody, they remind me of my friend from high school, I like them immediately. I meet someone, they remind me of the neighbor that I can't stand, I dislike them immediately. So which has nothing to do with gender or race or anything like that. But do you think that will be beneficial to the candidates?
There's a huge debate in that right now in the field. Basically, the legal aspects of this and the bias
Hmm.
are being debated. So some people believe it's less biased. So,
Hmm.
like you just mentioned, as humans, we as former recruiters, you know, or let's choose out other people
Yeah.
because you and I didn't do that. But like, sometimes they bring in their biases, and sometimes it's unconscious. And computers, what happens with the algorithms is they can actually be programming in the bias. So they
Oh,
have to
okay.
put in, I don't know exactly the technical terms, but put in stops to stop that from happening. And I forget which company it was, but basically they found out that they were hiring for software engineers, and they found out that they were discriminating against women. And because basically they took the top tier of employees, they took the resumes that scored the best, and then they tried to sort through, and they found out and that there was class action lawsuits about discriminating against women. And that's just one example. So it's a huge, it's kind of similar to things that are going on with Chat GPT right now, where people are talking about how do we police this? Like, this is going to go crazy on us. And it's kind of similar in some ways. People are like, how do we have transparency in these AI processes?
Mhm.
And what does that mean for human resource teams? So it's super, super interesting. There's people on both sides of it, and there's laws and policies coming into play that will probably be much different in 10 years than they are from right now.
Yeah, well, I that is absolutely fascinating, and the only thing is, that made me think of, I went to a meeting at my local SHRM chapter, quite a few years ago, and the people that came in, I forget which company they're from, they were implementing something where, when, say, if you were interviewing me, that you would have sort of a scorecard and just check off things on the scorecard to make it less subjective, with you just saying, well, I liked Annette, and somebody goes, well, I don't know, I didn't like her so much, that you would have something more objective. Did they still do anything like that, or
Yeah,
is
they
that?
definitely do that. That's very, very common. So candidates get scored, and they are trying to eliminate bias by asking the same questions to the same candidates. So it's that structured interview process.
Mhm.
They don't want people to go off script. That's a problem. So some of these systems are eliminating that rogue hiring manager who would ask, hey, how many kids do you have?
Yeah.
You know, so
Oh yeah. Bad move.
right.
Yeah.
So companies like it for that reason, because it is so structured. And like you said, it's that predictable. We can't go back, and somebody can't say we discriminated against them by asking certain questions, because we know our questions are sound and the same
Mhm.
questions were asked to the same people for the same exact job.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, and I was going to ask you about this anyway, that you were a recruiter, you were a corporate recruiter. So what made you move into coaching?
It was kind of like a lot of people roundabout. So I left because I was a stay-at-home mom and I had my third kid, and I was like, there's too many balls up in the air here. And I loved my job. But while I was working as a recruiter, I felt frustrated sometimes because you can't give candidates the feedback. And
Mhm.
so many times I still feel this to this day, that people just need a little bit of help, and they can do so much better, particularly in interviews. I
Mhm.
guess for resumes too. So I, in between that time, part of the time I was a stay-at-home mom, then I kind of fell into a different career, literally by accident. I mean, well, I was a part of a program, and then I ended up kind of running the program, and I thought I did a good job in everything, but it was not wasn't what I was interested in doing.
Mhm.
And so through that time, for many, many years, I helped family and friends, just for free. So I'm one of those people, like, they talk about this gig economy, and they talk about starting off, you're doing things just for free, just
Mhm.
pro bono and wanting to help people. So for years and years, I helped family members and friends and former colleagues with interviewing, with their resume. And then I remember one day I Googled like interview coach, and I didn't even know it was a thing. And so
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I took a couple certifications. I started doing resumes, got some attention for some of the resumes that I did. And then kind of the rest is history.
Yeah, well, you are very talented. You are very talented. I've talked to you. I've seen you in action. I've heard you speak many times and seen your work. So
Thank
you
you.
are really really talented. So um, one thing that I like to ask, is our time is just about done here. It goes by so quickly. Um, I've asked you a lot of things. We've talked about a few different topics, but I'd like to ask you if you have any, final thoughts, something that you would think people should know that we haven't really talked about yet.
Ooh, I'm gonna just pick something off the topic a little bit, and
Oh, that's
I
fine.
guess it kind of feeds into video interviewing, but knowing your differentiators is huge. I feel like we are all unique individuals, and knowing what you bring to the table that is different from your colleagues who maybe do that same job. That's
Mhm.
the key, I think, for especially interview coaching and for resume branding. And I know, oh my gosh, I'm talking to the expert on this, but personal branding is all about kind of like what makes you different, and you don't have
Mhm.
to be like everybody else. And there used to be this old adage of like selling yourself, and I believe the new adage is more not you selling. Yes, you have to align with the position,
Mhm.
but then after that, how are you different? What are you bringing that other people might not? How do you solve problems in a different way? So I just feel so passionately about that everybody has that. And I love my job because I love uncovering that within people.
Yeah. No, oh, I agree with you. I agree with you because it's not just what you do, how you do it makes you you. It makes you different
Mhm.
from every. So instead of selling yourself, it's more like being yourself
Yeah,
and then showing people who you are. So
right.
so I love that. And how can people get in touch with you? They're watching on the replay or maybe listening to this on the podcast. Connect with you on LinkedIn.
Yep. LinkedIn, it's Paula Christensen 1. And I'm pretty active on there. I try to post helpful content. I'm not going to try to sell you anything. So that's probably the best way. They can also look at my website, which is strategiccareercoaches.com.
Okay. Well, again, I thank you so much for being here. It's always a treat to chat with you, and I look forward to seeing you in person in the not too
Yes.
distant future. So, okay. Well, thank you everyone who has joined us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.